Yesterday, a fire broke out in the 12th floor of a tower block in West London, moments away from Grenfell Tower.
Yes, one person has been hospitalised and 2 more were assessed at the scene.
The location of the fire, and it being so soon after the 5-year anniversary of the Grenfell disaster, brought back horrible memories for many in the area.
Yes, so many of you, our viewers and listeners, got in touch to ask what has actually changed since Grenfell. Have the lessons actually been learnt at all?
So joining us to discuss this in more detail are Lucy Masoud, a former firefighter and barrister at the Staple Inn Chambers, and Paul Afshar from End Our Cladding Scandal. Thank you both very much for joining us. Lucy, if I can come to you, what has changed in 5 years?
To be blunt, very little. We know that since Grenfell, the largest loss of life to a fire since the Second World War. 72 people, men, women and children, burned to death in their beds. And since then, we still have 53 buildings in this country that are covered in the same flammable illegal cladding that was wrapped round Grenfell Tower. So very little has changed. We still have residents in this country that are living in death traps, and this government doesn't seem to want to do too much about it. We have an inquiry ongoing into the cause of Grenfell. That has been going on for a number of years now. I don't have much hope that the residents and the community around Grenfell will get the answers to what they want as to why that fire happened and to make sure it doesn't happen again. In regards to fire safety, we know leading up to the fire at Grenfell, we had seen 10 fire stations in London closed down, 29 fire engines in London removed from the front line, and over 1,000 firefighter job losses in London. Again, leading up to the fire in Grenfell, the fire cover for Kensington, which is where Grenfell is based, as you know, was actually reduced by 50%. Now, since then, we haven't seen an increase in firefighters. We haven't seen an increase in fire engines or fire stations opening. In fact, we're seeing more pressure on emergency services. So, again, in answer to your question, very little has changed.
Cladding Scandal, which is an organisation basically campaigning for people who still have this cladding to find some safety, basically. We mentioned there the staggering numbers who still live in unsafe homes. Why is it the case that nothing has been done? These people are living in a potential fire hazard day in, day out, aren't they?
You're absolutely right. And it's not just the 50 to 100 blocks is what we estimate around the UK that are still wrapped in dangerous and illegal Grenfell cladding. It's the thousands of blocks that are still have cladding as well, much like my own, unfortunately. Your question was, why has progress been so slow? It really beggars belief. In all honesty, and I wish I knew the answer. About a year ago, the government committed to taking on pretty much all recommendations of the Grenfell inquiry, as it's still going on. But actually, in terms of implementing them, they've done very little. You know, you've got the fire brigade who have implemented their recommendations, the police, etc. The government have barely implemented any of the recommendations, including critically two. One is around the stay put notice. So this is when there's a fire, folk are told to stay put rather than necessarily evacuated. But more importantly, two, around evacuating disabled people and people with accessibility issues. So you've kind of got to ask the question, it's not only why hasn't the government not done enough, it's why is the government now refusing to implement very sensible recommendations from the Grenfell inquiry 5 years on from this tragedy? It's just beggars belief.
We're going to be talking to a very interesting guest in a moment about the concept of restorative justice and how, when you've been wronged, you can move forward and work, find some sort of closure and acceptance to what happened to you. Lucy, how hard is it for the people who were in Grenfell to know that nothing has changed? And would it make their lives better to think that at least some good had come out of the tragedy?
Of course, I wasn't a resident in Grenfell Tower, so I wouldn't dare to try and talk for them. But just having conversations with the people who I have met who live in the community, and some of them who did actually live in the tower. I was actually at the 5-year anniversary last week. And there's anger. There's rightful anger in this community. Since the fire, every month there's been a silent walk, and it would take place on the 14th of each month, which was the day that the fire took place. In recent times, that's moved to once every 6 months. It's always been a silent walk just to really sort of commemorate and remember those 72 people who died. But I think if this inquiry ends and this community doesn't get answers, and I don't think that they will, to be honest, I think people will feel that they've come away without justice. I mean, we know 5 years on, the only person so far who's been made accountable and who's lost their job as a result of what happened at Grenfell has been a firefighter, and that was Danny Cotton. It's not been the people who actually put the cladding on that building.
No problem.
So
Can you hear me now?
I think
Cool.
if the community does not get answered, it's going to very quickly turn into anger. And this community is going to start to really
Okay, sorry, mate.
kind of speak out and demand answers, because they just haven't got them up until now.
Yeah, and Paul, what do you say to people who today might be living in one of those blocks with that, as you call it, Grenfell cladding, who are seeing this in action on the part of the government? Is there any sense of hope for the near future?
Well, you can't but have hope, to be honest, because what we have from the government at the moment is a recognition that it is not the fault of people like me, people like the survivors of Grenfell who are still living in these buildings, that they have dangerous and flammable cladding. So we've had at least that commitment from government and a commitment to funding the removal of that cladding. The challenge, of course, is the speed at which that is happening. If I was someone living in one of those high-rises, well, first of all, I'd try and sell it, because I would not want to live in a dangerous apartment at all, and that's a real anxiety, a real mental health toll that a lot of these folk have. But secondly, I'm afraid it's about standing up. The campaign that we've got is basically a bunch of affected leaseholders up and down the country who said, no, we've had enough. We're not going to take this sitting down. We're going to get in contact with our local politicians. We're going to really pressure the government to actually do the things that they said they would do on this. So I would urge anyone living in one of these tower blocks, write to your local MP, get involved with your local campaign if you can, and actually stand up, because we're here with you, and it's only by standing up that you'll get political will to actually make the change.
All right. Thank you ever so much. Paul Afshar there from End Our Cladding Scandal, and Lucy Masoud, former firefighter and barrister at Staple Inn Chambers. Thank you both. And apologies for our sound gremlin that I think we had in the middle of that. Sometimes these things happen.